Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I'm gonna make a video talking a little bit about misfires and how I go about diagnosing it or chasing it if it's an intermittent problem. A lot of times it is an intermittent issue. Um, so we'll start off by scanning the vehicle. Say you found the P0301, which is a misfire, cylinder number one. So in this story, we're gonna say that the vehicle is not currently misfiring. Um, So you clear the code and you power brake the vehicle. Power braking is putting the vehicle under load. So you put the vehicle in drive, hold the brake all the way down, and hold the throttle wide open. And then you watch your live data on your scan tool for the misfire counters. If you don't detect any misfires, then the fault is intermittent. So since we are saying that the fault is intermittent, then this is my approach and how I go about things. So if I have a misfire on cylinder number one, but the cylinder is not misfiring when the vehicle came into the shop, clear the codes, make sure that it's not misfiring, and then I start moving my components. So I just had a car in the shop. I did a fuel injector because it's super common on the 2.5 Smart Stream engines. It was a Tucson with 2.5 in it. And then the vehicle actually came back with the same code. So what I did was I moved all the components around this, except the fuel injector, which was just replaced. So since I already know that I replaced the GDI injector on the first visit, so what I did was I cleared the code and then the coil for number one, I moved to cylinder number two. And then I documented it on the repair order. That way I know um, if it starts to misfire on a different cylinder, I know what component the misfire is following. So I move the coil from cylinder one to number two, and then I move the spark plug from cylinder number one to number four. And then these engines do have 8 injectors. They have 4 low pressure fuel injectors, and then they have 4 GDI injectors or gasoline direct inject. So I moved the low pressure fuel injector from cylinder number one to cylinder number three. So like I said, the vehicle came in previously for a misfire on number one. I replaced the fuel injector, the GDI injector, due to it being so common. Unfortunately, the vehicle came back, and it's an intermittent misfire, meaning that the concern is not present when the vehicle is in my bay or when I'm driving it. So it's not a hard misfire. If it was a mechanical issue such as bent valve, burnt valve, low compression, more than likely those are not intermittent misfires. It's going to be a hard miss, and you'll be able to detect it pretty easily. So since the vehicle is not actively misfiring, I went ahead and documented on my repair order what component went to what cylinder. Coil number one went to cylinder number two. Spark plug number one went to cylinder number four. And my low pressure fuel injector, cylinder number one, was moved to cylinder number three. And then I went ahead and erased the trouble codes. So delete codes and then reset adaptive values. Reset the adaptive values after clearing the codes. Now we're going to test drive the vehicle in our possession before we release it to the customer. And we're going to try to drive the vehicle until it misfires again. And in my theory, I'm hoping that the cylinder misfire follows one of the components. So if my cylinder comes back misfire number two, then I go back to my repair order. If I documented that I moved the injector there, then I'm going to replace that low pressure fuel injector due to a intermittent fault. and so on and so forth. If my misfire comes back on number 3, then I know it's the coil. If it's the spark plug, it's gonna be on number 4 or whatever I documented. Um, so that's hoping that the misfire doesn't come back on the same cylinder. If it does, then I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board and possibly start checking wiring to the fuel injector, coil, low pressure fuel injector, high pressure fuel injector. Um, like I said, I don't think it's an intermittent fault with the actual mechanical issue. If it was a mechanical issue, 99% out of 100, it's going to be misfiring at all times. It doesn't come and go like a faulty component would. Um, so let's say that the vehicle has a hard misfire, P0301 active. You could feel the misfire, and you're also getting, when you're watching your misfire counter, live data, misfire number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 on live data. So I do use a code to point me in the direction of which cylinder I'm chasing. But I also don't put my money on just the trouble code. Personally, I delete the code and then I go to my current data, live data, misfire counters. So once the code is cleared, I'll power brake the engine and I'll watch my counters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 if it's a V8. So if it is truly misfiring on cylinder number 1, your misfire counter is going to be rising on cylinder number 1. So 500 counts, we'll say. 500 counts of misfire on cylinder number 1. So now we know for sure that cylinder 1 is in fact misfiring. So then I'll go out to the engine. Right away I'll start by pulling the coil and looking at the spark plug, looking for signs of tracking or arcing on the spark plug or on the coil boot. And then I'll start off by moving the coil. So coil number 1, I'll move to number 4. And then if the code's set again, I'll clear it. And then I'll go back to my live data. If my misfire is still counting on number 1, 500 counts, and I remove the coil, then I know that my coil is not the problem. Then I'll move to the spark plug. Then I'll move the spark plug from cylinder number 1 to cylinder number 3, clear the code, and then go back to my live data and check my counters. If my misfire is now on number 3, then I know it's my spark plug that's the issue. So say you swapped your spark plug, your coil. Most of these vehicles have GDI injectors, so it's not a easy swap like a spark plug and a ignition coil. You have to remove the intake manifold, and then you have to replace the high pressure fuel pump, the feed line, which is a hard line from the GDI pump to the rail. All those high pressure components are one-time use. They're really high pressure lines. So at idle, you're looking at least 500, and under load or throttle, you're looking at 2,500 or more, depending on the model. So if I remove my plug and my coil, then I'm gonna do a compression test on that cylinder. Depending on the engine, if it's a turbo engine, you're looking probably around 160 psi of compression. That is a healthy cylinder. Good known compression. If it's a GDI NA motor, naturally aspirated, you're probably looking at 210 psi of compression. So if your compression's good, you remove your spark plug and your coil, I would feel confident shooting a fuel injector at it. If you really want the proper diagnosis, then you're gonna have to tell the customer. You're gonna have to tell the customer, hey, your compression's good, your spark plug is good, your coil is good. The last suspect is the high pressure fuel injector. However, to do the job, just to swap the fuel injector, you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot. Say you charge 2.5 hours to just to swap the fuel injector, and then you identify that the injector is in fact bad, then you have to do the job again. So you have to word it right to the customer and tell them, hey, this is what we found. This is where we need to start by replacing the high pressure fuel injector, or you get paid me twice to swap it and tell you yes it's bad, and then replace it and then charge you again to replace the actual part. So that's the way that I approach it. When it comes to compression, a hard misfire is not going to be effective. Say your spec is the 210 and you read 195. I don't think that's going to cause a hard misfire, because that's, what is it, 15%. So to actually be a hard misfire, you'd probably be looking probably 30% of a loss. So I would say 170 PSI might be causing a misfire issue. And then the way that I do a compression test, so obviously when you do when you do a compression test, the first thing that needs to be addressed is you're gonna have the spark plug out of the cylinder, obviously, and then you're gonna have your coils hanging, just sitting on top of the valve cover. You're supposed to remove all 4 spark plugs when doing a compression test. So it's very important to know that if you're cranking the vehicle and you don't disable spark or fuel delivery, your coils are going to be firing off while your cylinders that you're not testing are going to be blowing out pressure. And in that pressure is going to be unburnt fuel. Right, so now all on top of your cylinder head, there's unburnt fuel being pumped out on top of the engine, and then your coils are sitting on top of the cylinder head. If that coil ignites this air fuel mixture here, you're going to have a big ass fire. So first thing you gotta do is either disable your fuel delivery or disable your spark, whatever route you want to go. If you want to do both, more power to you, and even safer. So when I do a compression test, most of these vehicles have a bulkhead, wire harness that goes under the intake manifold that fires off your fuel injectors. So I'll unplug that connector, and then that tells me that the fuel injectors will no longer spray. But something that's overlooked, and you could cause a big ass fire. So just keep that in mind. If you don't disable the injectors, then unplug every coil, or you could pull the coil fuse. Just do something to either kill spark or fuel. And then, so I'll install my gauge, cylinder number 1, and then I'll hold the throttle wide open. So these vehicles with the electric throttle, if you hit the accelerator pedal, the throttle doesn't open. I've learned that over the years, so I don't even bother with that. So I'll go inside the vehicle and I lay my gauge on the windshield as I'm cranking, and I'll just sit there and crank the engine until my needle stops moving. I know there's some people that say to give it, I don't know, X amount of revolutions and then see where it lands, but I'll keep cranking it. Say it stops at 170 psi and the needle is no longer climbing, then I'm going to write down that the cylinder produced 170 psi of compression. Okay, so let's say now that your compression, in fact, your spec is 210, actual or measured is 140. So for sure your compression is low and you have a misfire. The final step in the diagnostic procedure is to perform a leak down test. So your leak down tester is going to have 2 gauges. And then the line that goes to the cylinder, number 1. Alright, so your leak down tester is going to have 2 pressure gauges. You're going to have a pressure knob, and then your hose that goes to the cylinder, just like a compression tester. And then the shop air, you also hook up shop air to it because you're pressurizing the system. Shop air. So the first thing you need to do is figure out the firing order of the cylinders. On Hyundais, it's 1. I think it's 1, 3, 4, 2. So you need to set the cylinder number 1 to TDC. You could do that by using the crank pulley. So your timing cover is going to have, this is your timing cover. There's going to be some numbers here on the bottom of the timing cover. They're going to be labeled 5, 10, 0, and probably negative 5. So your crank pulley, somewhere on the crank pulley, you're going to have a line, a notch. You need to spin your engine so that notch is lined up with the 0 or the T. Some engines have different markings on the timing cover. So you need to set your engine to TDC. When that line on the crank pulley is lined up with the 0 on the timing cover, then you know that cylinder number 1 is that top dead center, TDC. Number 1. Every time this line lines up with the 0, cylinder number 1 is at top dead center. It doesn't matter. The only thing that you need to be aware of is there's 2 TDCs, right? Well, there's only 1 TDC, but the camshafts spin at different rotations than the crank. So you could be at TDC and you could be on compression. And then you could be at TDC and you could be on exhaust or intake. So you need to be on TDC compression. When you're on compression, then all the valves are closed on cylinder number 1. And that's where you need to be to pressurize the system. So the only way that you could determine if you're on compression is if you have the valve cover off. So the camshaft is going to have, running out of room. So your lobes look like this, right? So this is your camshaft lobe. your lobes need to be pointing up. That tells you that the valves are closed. If the lobes were pointing down, then you know that the valves are being pushed down by the lobe. So the cam is not a perfect circle; it has lobes on it. So the lobe is what opens the valve. So on compression stroke, you're going to have your camshaft lobes pointing up like this. If they're pointing down, you're on the wrong stroke. Spin the engine again, back to TDC, and then your lobes should point up. So now let's say that you are on cylinder number 1 TDC compression stroke. You're gonna go ahead and start adding pressure into the cylinder. So you're gonna have your knob here. That's what pressurizes the cylinder. So your gauge on the left, you set it to 100 psi. So you're feeding the cylinder 100 psi. And then the gauge on the right, this gauge is your leak indicator. So if you're pumping in 100 psi, a perfect cylinder is going to show 100 psi on this side. So the way that this tester works is if you're adding 100 on this gauge, and on this gauge you're only seeing 40, that tells you they have a 60% leak. Okay, so now you determine that you have a 60% leak. You have a 60% leak. Now you need to determine where is my compression going, where is my pressure going. So it could either be going into the cooling system, it could be going into the crankcase, it could be going into the intake manifold, or it could be going into the exhaust manifold. So depending on where that pressure is going is going to determine your diagnosis. So the way that we do it is we use a latex glove, and you start checking areas like the dipstick or the oil fill cap. So you would place your glove over the oil fill cap, and if it starts to inflate on its own, then you know that your pressure is going into the combustion chamber. So that could be scored cylinder walls, a damaged piston or rings. And then you could put a this is your exhaust or tailpipe. Looks like a fierro. So you you put your glove on the tailpipe, and if that starts to inflate, then you know that you have a problem with your exhaust valves. And if it's an intake valve, you remove your intake boot and go to your throttle body and put a glove over that. If your glove blows up on the throttle body, then you know you have an issue with, it could either be the intake valve that's burnt or bent. It could also be, I think it could also be a bad exhaust valve still, because if the valve is open, you could still be forcing air through the exhaust valve. I'm not sure if I'm correct on that. But if your throttle body is blowing up the glove, then you know that you have an issue with one of your valves. And then you would stick your bore scope in there and see if it's the exhaust or intake. No matter what, you're going to be pulling the head. And then the final place that it could be is in your cooling system. So you can remove your radiator cap. This is your radiator neck. And then you can install your burping funnel, which everybody should have in the shop. Add some coolant. You're gonna put your coolant in there. you pressurize your system. If you start seeing bubbles coming out of the funnel, then you know you have a head gasket issue, a cracked cylinder head, a cracked sleeve, something along those lines. The head is coming off regardless. I think that's all I have for you guys. Hope it all makes sense. Like I said in the past, I know there's a lot of techs that watch these videos. Some have experience already, so this is second nature. But there is also some younger cats that are watching my videos. So that's my approach on chasing a misfire. Peace.